afternoon. I am Paula Fontana, Vice President of Strategic Programming Initiatives with the National Black MBA Association. Thank you so much for joining us for another crucial conversation around reaching racial equity. So last year, particularly as the world watched the senseless killing of George Floyd, we saw an increased global visibility around racial injustice and a heightened awareness around the systemic inequities that exist in our nation. Press releases from a plethora of companies and institutions really placing a stake in the ground on where they stand on the issue of racism soon followed. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Quoting our president and CEO, Joe Handy, how do we now get beyond the hashtag? So as an association that leads in the creation of educational, wealth building, and growth opportunities for Blacks, getting to the point where we reach racial equity is truly mission critical, as it is the baseline for our members attaining those opportunities and the key to success for our partners and the communities in which we serve. So to move the needle, we have called on our partners to commit to the difficult and long-term work of improving equity and opportunity within their respective organizations. And with that commitment, having safe space conversations where we highlight best practices that lead to solutions for other organizations as they navigate their journeys to take intentional, deliberate steps to widen the road of opportunity for all. I am delighted to have such a conversation this afternoon with Angela Martin, Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Equitable. In this role, she oversees the creation and execution of their comprehensive multi-year D&I strategy. Most recently, she was appointed to lead a team on the Equitable CEO Task Force for Advancing Racial Equity. She was also the recipient of their CEO Award, given to leaders who demonstrate exemplary commitment toward excellence, creativity, and innovation while delivering outstanding contributions to business success. Angela, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this vital conversation to move us forward.
Thank you, Paul. I'm so excited to be here, and I can speak on behalf of all of Equitable. We're so excited for the partnership and everything that we have this year and for next year. So we're just really excited to build out that partnership.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the groundwork for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. For those of you listening, know that I'm just going to ask Angela a couple questions, but we want to get questions from you. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can during this time. So Angela, let's start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and why racial equity is so important to you.
Sure. So I'll just give a little background. I had a little bit of an unconventional career journey into this space, and I'll talk a little bit about what drives my passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and especially racial equity. So I've been with Equitable for 11 years. 8 years of my career I spent in compliance and regulatory, so supporting our Equitable advisors and wealth management business. Throughout that time, I've always had an extreme interest and passion for being, involved in our diversity inclusion efforts, heavily involved in leadership capacity in the employee resource groups, and really knew ultimately that at some point in my career journey, I wanted to get into this space. So 3 years ago, there was an opportunity to come into this role as the head of diversity, equity, inclusion. And really the rest is history. I think we've been making great progress. And then as Paula mentioned, last year, we commissioned the CEO Task Force to advance racial equity, which I'll get into more in our conversation. But just the piece on passion, I think, is really important, and to just shed a little bit of light on my journey into Equitable. So like most college graduates, trying to find their company that they want to build a career with. When I was joining Equitable, I also was going through some personal matters where I hadn't come out to my family yet. And I waited until I received my offer at Equitable because I wanted to know that I had the financial security, that I was able to live on my own and provide for myself. If, in fact, when I came out, that my family didn't agree with what, my lifestyle choices were, and that if they kicked me out of the house, I was able to provide for myself, as well as if, the relationship was so strained that I had to leave. So thinking about that and joining Equitable, and really having Equitable provide for me in that capacity, I decided when I joined Equitable that it was just too emotional what I just went through, that I wasn't going to come out right away at work. And it took me actually another 2 years to fully come out at work. And I attribute a lot of that journey to the then DNI office and, really the support mechanisms that we had in place, as well as the employee resource groups, as a source of comfort and building my confidence and building my network of other members of the LGBTQ community, as well as, the strong allyship that I had. So I think that's what ultimately was what ignited the fire that I have to drive a more diverse, equitable, inclusive culture here. And ultimately what's driving the racial equity journey for us. I think that I committed at that time that I would do everything in my power to build a more equitable future for other diverse and underrepresented communities. And that is exactly what the team is doing today. So I just think everyone has their, personal experience and journey, and that's a little bit of a glimpse into what drives me every day.
That's awesome. So thank you for sharing that journey with us. Having the courage to come out, I feel like is a big part of. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, but that sounds a lot like Equitable made it feel like a place where you could belong. Like they provided that empathy for you. Would you say that that's true, and that's sort of the core of who or what the organization provides?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think empathy is so key because as you're not gonna tell everyone exactly how to react to situations, exactly how to support each other. But if you lead with that empathy and allyship mindset, I think that you just create this inclusive organization where everyone feels that they're welcome. They are able to aspire to anything they want to be and grow into in the company. And I think that that's been the journey that we've been on for the last, decade plus. And that's what I'm proud of, is that we keep building, because if you stay stagnant, you won't make progress. I think you have to keep evolving. I think you have to keep pushing and keep learning as a company.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I love what you said about making everyone feel welcome. Again, sort of setting that baseline for belonging. So, in the introduction, I mentioned that you led this group or this task, the CEO task force to advance racial equity and the mission. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, you mentioned post George Floyd's murder. Like most companies, we were thinking, and we got together right away. Our executive team, our Black Leadership Network, and we're like, what are we going to do? And we knew a few things we didn't want to do. One, we didn't want to just, post a platitude with no action or intent behind it. We knew that whatever we say and do is going to be a long standing commitment to the Black community. It won't just be a flash and then it dies in a month. So when we were thinking about what does that look like and feel like, we came up with, let's create a task force that's focused on advancing racial equity, that's intentional to really change big systems in our company, to create more equity within our systems, and ultimately attract and retain more Black talent. And I'd like to read our mission statement from the Racial Equity Task Force. Our mission is to be the most sought after employer for Black professionals by shattering racial inequities in our workplace and building an Equitable that supports and invests in the careers and well-being of our Black employees and advisors. So that's really our mindset. That's our North Star. Whenever we feel like, are we doing what we're set out to do? We read that to ourselves because like that's the gold standard, right? And we feel that shattering those racial inequities that we have in our system and external, and then building that investment and well-being, that's ultimately what we're trying to do.
That's excellent. And again, I have like so many questions. I could dig deeper. For those of you listening, if you have questions, again, I encourage you to put them in the chat and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. So, in that description that you talked about, I mean, I heard words like action, longstanding commitment to the Black community. That's great. And as well as attract and retain. So, it feels like sometimes companies, find it easy to attract the Black talent, but don't necessarily retain them. Can you speak specifically about what type of retention strategies you have at Equitable?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that we did from a retention standpoint, we thought about how do we create some authentic talent programs that are curated for our Black employees. So since the inception a year ago of the task force, we have 4 talent programs specifically for Black talent that are in flight. So over 65 of our Black employees are in these programs, and they're all extremely different. I think that's, one thing that I really want to be intentional about is that we are curating solutions for Equitable and what Equitable is going through and what problems we identify within Equitable. So those talent programs, I think, are really specific to meet Black talent where they are in their career journey, what they're aspiring to do ultimately. And then also, I think research proves this, but also what we found within Equitable is that our Black talent is lacking the mentorship and sponsorship that's needed to excel in their careers. So syncing them up with those senior leaders, the most senior leaders we have in the company, as well as other mentorship support mechanisms, hearing from Black leaders in our company and externally. So we're really trying to listen to our talent and then really supply them with the development that they need.
That's great. And I love that you talked about the senior leadership, right? So being able to see people who look like you if you are Black, who represent what you look like. So can you talk a little bit about what that diversity or Black percentage looks like for senior leadership?
Yeah. So, here at Equitable, we're making great strides in looking at our talent pipeline, understanding where there's opportunities for Black talent to break into other areas of the industry. Like many companies, you see certain pockets of the business that have more diverse representation, either be it gender or racial diversity. But then how do we create those opportunities where people are exposed to different career paths? I think that's what's most critical too, is sometimes you just feel like you get siloed into how do I break into other areas, or what does it take for me to network within another area? We're starting to break down those silos and then really try to see where the pipeline opportunities are.
That's great. And that's where sponsorship, especially within the organization, can help, right? So they see what your talents and skills are and where it might fit best within the organization. So
Exactly.
great work. So I see a question that has come up from the group.
Yeah.
Angela, how can someone break into the DEI realm? Every position I've looked at demands years of experience. How can those of us new to the industry break in?
Really good question. And I feel like I'm getting this question a lot. And what I'm so excited about is there's so many people that are interested in getting involved in this type of work for companies, which is a good problem for companies. But I think we have to create the space for people to explore and contribute to it. So I think a few opportunities I would think about. I got into it from an employee resource group perspective. So I took on a leadership role, and that gave the visibility of what I was capable of doing in this space. So think about if there's any, leadership positions or ways to get involved more in the employee resource groups, then you'll stay more connected to the D&I team. There's also many companies have what they'll call like business leadership, D&I advocate forums or leadership committees. Can you get connected, within your business area or within that committee to either partner and do some work or just understand the work more in depth? I think those are probably 2 tangible examples I can give that I've been giving guidance to our employees as well that want to break in.
That's great. So kind of a follow-up question that I see that has come in. It seems like DEI is quite popular topic now, especially like we've mentioned within this past year. What about the flip side? So what challenges did you face in the implementation of these initiatives?
I love that. And listen, nothing good or worth doing does not come with its challenges, right? So I think a few things that we faced early on. The name of the task force is CEO Task Force to Advance Racial Equity. And we early on decided that we're going to be hyper focused on the Black community and that we're going to be building models and initiatives that we could ultimately use for other underrepresented groups. So we were crystal clear in that to the organization. I think the pushback and the questioning that we received from the organization was, well, what about us? What about the
Mhm.
Hispanic Latino community? What about the Asian community right now going through the pandemic and everything that we're facing? So what we've been trying to do, I think one challenge is balancing it all. There's limited resources, limited funding every year. How do we do it all in a fair and equitable way? But also, when we have to put our foot down and say, no, this is because we need to capitalize on this opportunity right now that we see, and that we have to in order to make real progress, we have to go all in on this matter. So I think that's one challenge and I think how we've navigated it is having truthful conversations and just really thinking through how we support everyone and how we support each other, right? For underrepresented community across, how do we support each other? How do we show up and be allies to one another too?
That's great. And it seems like you have to have continual conversations like that, not just when there's a problem, to be able to have true dialogue around the issues.
Exactly, because then it's just performative, right?
Right.
Then you're just showing up when the media's covering you, when you think it's going to benefit you. What's true change is to show up when no one else is showing up, right? To do the hard work day in and day out. I think that's what we're trying to do and create that long, sustainable change.
Excellent. I absolutely love this next question and feel like many companies need help as they think about getting to that next level in their journey. And the question is, how can companies come up with practical ways to raise awareness about unconscious biases and achieve tangible change?
Yeah, I agree. Really good question. So, unconscious bias, I want to talk a little bit about how we approach training, because
Mhm.
I think that was interesting over the last year plus. So, we were in a completely virtual environment. The last couple of years, we were doing some live workshops on the ground, getting people together. So, we had to really rethink that. And what we came up with was the team came up with this, which is amazing, is monthly nudges, I'll call them, which are 5-minute videos where an employee of ours speaks with an external expert and kind of uncovers an unconscious bias or micro inequity, and just it's thought provoking. I think when I find that people make these breakthrough moments from an unconscious bias standpoint is when you nudge them enough for them to do the self exploration. If you sit them through a 3-hour workshop and take them through, do this, don't do this, you could say this, don't say that, it falls flat. I think when you really encourage them and pique their interest just enough for them to do the hard work, I think that creates more change. So we've seen a lot of success with that. And in those nudge videos, we've had 95% of our organization take them. So I think we've had extreme, great take utilization on that. And then I think we've had really good feedback. And then the tangible change, I think this is the piece that you really have to get into the hard stuff. Like you really need to infiltrate the big systems in the company. And I think it's also a balancing act in how do you make it attractive to the business leaders? I think, we're all different, we're all unique, but I try to do as much as possible to study our business leaders to understand which is the business leader that I need to enter the room and be data driven, which is the leader that I have to be more emotionally driven and talk about the softer side of things. How do I express the knowledge that I know about their business to show them the value prop in listening to the D&I team? Like, why should they invite us to the table? And then I think you start to see those tangible results, and then you start to get that momentum. And then I think at the end of the day, our business leaders are super competitive with one another. So I think you try to highlight what one is doing and what others should be thinking about. And that's been really helpful in driving tangible results.
That's great. So you may have touched on the answer to my next question, was about just realizing that systemic changes have to come from the top. How do you encourage those leaders at the top to be able to affect change, starting with the CEO, and it seems like with the introduction of the task force?
Yeah, I think, luckily we have extreme support from the top. I think the change over the last year, and I attribute this to the pandemic as well as, like George Floyd murder. I think it changed people's hearts and minds, honestly. I think
Mhm.
people are more open to have these really emotional discussions. I think we brought pieces into the workplace that we never brought before. And I think it opened people up. But, we had a series of courageous conversations, which I know many companies did, over 1,000 of our employees and financial professionals. And when you see people that you have been working with for 10 years break down and cry
Mm,
about the inequities that they face, there is no way that doesn't change you as a human and
right,
as a leader. And I think that changed our executive team. I think that their mindset on this is it's not just a business imperative. We know that. We know the stats. We know what it can do for our business, but it's just the right thing to do at the end of the day.
right,
So I think that's, to me, the senior leadership support. It's not only the business imperative, because that gets old. That storyline gets a little stale. I think when you really talk about what we're doing for society and how we're on the right side of history, that's
right.
that's what gets people going.
Hmm. I agree so much and agree with what you said about, I feel like that was the one good thing about COVID and forcing us to be home and seeing each other in these virtual spaces and our families and our lives and realizing that we're more than just workers, right? We're people, like you mentioned. And so being able to connect and make sure that that our people are good is really the ultimate. And like we talked about before, highlighting that empathy
Yep.
has come to the forefront in this environment. So I'd love to sort of get back to the task force because there's so many great things there. Can you tell me some of the outcomes of the task force that you are most proud of and what you're looking forward to with the future with it?
Yeah, definitely. So, and I know the whole team is tuned in right now, so I'm very proud of everything that they've accomplished. I think, when I think back, it's a year ago, almost to the date that we were stood up as a new organization. There's 11 individuals that are solely focused on racial equity in this company. I think we put immense pressure on achieving results. And sometimes, we feel like we're not moving as fast as we should be. But then when we look back at all that we've achieved, it's amazing what we were able to achieve in a year. So we think about it in three separate segments. We think about representation, we think about culture and experience, and then performance and development.
Hmm.
So first, representation, our Black representation is up, advancement numbers are up. So, I think that's a great indicator that what we're doing from a recruiting and retention standpoint is working. When we think about the culture and experience, we look at one indicator is the employee net promoter score. So what our Black employees recommend working at Equitable, and that's up over 300% since the inception of the task force. And then lastly, when we think about development and we look to those 4 talent programs that I spoke about before, and we have over 65 of our Black employees in talent programs, that's a success metric for development and performance of our talent. So those are just a few items that we're looking to as outcomes and really driving the success.
That's great. And I mean very specific measures. Love the net promoter score. Was that something that those different measures, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get changed, right? Was that part of the task force to develop those measures, or were they already in place prior to?
So they were already in place, but what I would say is that I would say analyzing it on a by race basis wasn't as prominent as it should have been. So I think we shed light on, all right, that's the whole net promoter score, but we should really look at this by gender, by race. And then that's one of our key indicators and outcomes that we're driving towards. So we have a specific measure that we wanted to double the net promoter score by 2023. We put specific metrics in place on Black representation by 2023. So we were very specific about what we were driving towards.
Great. And then, as head of the task force, is that you who has a seat at that strategic planning session or someone else?
Yeah, it's there's really three leaders that are running the CEO task force. Luckily, we do have a seat at the table. I think we are welcomed by our CEO, our COO, the president of our business. They're executive sponsors of the task force, and we are invited into strategic. We've had a ton of discussions on our financial processes, our general account, how we're investing our money, our ESG strategy. So there's so many exciting things happening where the D&I team and the task forces are invited.
Excellent. Okay, next question on recruiting and hiring. Do you have any tips on how to assure that your company has a diverse pipeline of candidates and talent? One issue I've noticed is that while managing unconscious bias, it can be challenging to assure you're hiring diverse yet qualified candidates.
Yes, this is one that we are actively working on. So I think, again, early on when we were thinking about what we want to accomplish was sometimes you can set diversity best practices within recruiting that could potentially become a check the box. So we wanted to make sure that we analyze our pipeline really in depth to know, where are diverse talent potentially falling off? Where are we not attracting the diverse talent that we want to certain business segments? So we really studied the data first. Then we really tested a few different things. We tested diverse interview panels. So for certain segments of our hierarchy that we implemented required diverse interview panels where we were requiring a woman and a person of color to sit on the interview panel to check unconscious bias, and really think through that in the recruiting process. And now, we're also exploring, do you require diverse slates? Where does that requirement lie? So we're still analyzing that piece, but I think what we did was took baby steps in really testing and learning and then iterating on that and then keeping an eye on the pipeline to see what sticks and what's working.
Got it. So kind of a constant managing.
Yes.
Okay, so my last question for you is for organizations that are just getting started on their equity journey and trying to figure it out, what tools or pieces of advice would you provide to contribute to success?
Yeah, so a lot. But I'll narrow it down to two. So one is, I think, understand what problem you're solving for, because it can all feel really overwhelming. And it is overwhelming most days, but I think understanding what problem you're really trying to solve for, and then building off of that is creating an authentic, curated plan for your company. I think it's really easy to get caught up sometimes in this company's doing that company's doing that, they found success with this. But it's not an off-the-shelf solution. If it was, we probably wouldn't have jobs. We probably wouldn't be here. But I think what really successful practices do is take all those best practices, but then really curate it for your organization and then ask for feedback. And we've been trying to do this more is say, listen, we're not going to get everything perfect. We're not going to get everything right. But what we can really commit to is listening to you and changing midstream if we have to. So even in our talent programs, we have active listening sessions with the participants. And we change midstream. We say, okay, we're going to implement this. That was great feedback. We're going to do this for the next cohort. So we try to create that environment. But again, really curated for Equitable. And probably our solutions won't necessarily completely work for your organization, but I really challenge you to think about that.
That's great feedback. So listening and then being able to be nimble or change when after you've heard it that there was a need for a change. So this has been an incredible conversation. I hope all of you who have been listening also find it so. If you will, please provide us your feedback. You will see a survey provided in the link. We encourage you to fill it out. The first 25 who enter that survey and fill it out will enter in a chance to win an Amazon gift card. Angela, thank you to you as well as to Equitable. This conversation and these tools to move forward have been just incredible. Thank you all for tuning in and engaging with us this afternoon. As you continue on your racial equity conversation in your respective organizations, remember, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Until next time, move forward.